Now back to what Nyerere said. It prompted him to famously declare that if authorities in Kinshasa accepted the territories together with the natural resources therein, they must therefore be able to also accept the people that occupied the territories.
Pan-African Review is a platform that challenges assumptions about Africa and a space for introspective perspectives on matters of concern to Africans. Hello and welcome to the Pan-African Review podcast. This is your online spot for African discourse. I am your host, Mahatma Ulimwengu, and today we have a fascinating show for you. Our guest today is Kelvin Jakachira. He's a media researcher, PR and communications consultant, and he's an independent journalist based in Harare, Zimbabwe. We'll be discussing his article that he wrote in the Pan-African Review titled, "Will South Africa Aid and Abet Genocidal Pogroms in the DRC?" Guys, if you like this, as always, please like, share, subscribe, send this to your family and friends, and we will be back with Kelvin Jakachira. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us. I know it's been a bit of a nightmare trying to set this up, but I'm glad we could finally have it on the books.
Yes, indeed.
Well, we wanted to discuss your article in the Pan-African Review titled, "Will South Africa Aid and Abet Genocidal Pogroms in the DRC?" So let's just get into it. So starting us off, with SADC's involvement in the DRC, do you think the Nairobi peace process, which was led by the East African community, do you think that peace process is now dead?
Thank you very much for that question. I think the Nairobi peace process is now water under the bridge, despite the successes that they had achieved, especially through the deployment of the East African Force. The M23 had withdrawn from 80% of the territory that it had captured to facilitate dialogue with the Congolese government. But now with the removal of the East African Force, which was part of the integral part of the Nairobi peace process, it's back to square one. In my view, the East African community intervention was more acceptable to stakeholders due to its neutrality. The challenge now is that the SADC intervention force, that in my opinion is blindly plunged in this conflict, is facing a credibility crisis in that it has not yet explained its position in relation to DRC's collaboration with negative forces such as the genocidal force, the Democratic Forces of Liberation of Rwanda, better known as FDLR, largely made up of remnants of the forces responsible for planning and executing the genocide against the Tutsi in 1994 in Rwanda. It is important to understand that the FDLR is being facilitated by the DRC government to attack neighboring Rwanda. The same group is working together with the DRC army and other militia groups in Eastern DRC to commit genocide against the Congolese Tutsi in that region.
Okay, so with the SADC troops, how are they faring in Mozambique? And based on that, what do you expect their contribution to be in the DRC?
In my view, the SADC forces have contributed in subduing the terrorist groups, the terrorist group in Mozambique. But they have not been as effective as Rwanda, because I don't think they have been supported enough for that mission. So it then brings to doubt their effectiveness in dealing with the terrorist movement in northern province of Cabo Delgado. I'm saying this because when the insurgents were dislodged from their headquarters in Mosumba da Praia and other areas of northern Mozambique by the Rwanda security forces, they fled into areas under the operations of the SADC intervention force. And from there, they are emerging and launching deadly attacks on military and civilian targets. This is happening mainly in Macomia district, which of course is under the SADC area of operation. My understanding is that the remnants of the terrorists, who I believe are numbering up to between 200 to 450, are hiding in a Katupa forest, which is of course under the SADC of operation. And we all know that in the recent weeks or so, they've been emerging from there to target SADC forces and the Mozambican forces. And in fact, reports are suggesting that they've actually killed Mozambican soldiers and also soldiers from the SADC mission. So it shows that the terrorists they seem to operate in the areas under the SADC area of operation than in areas under the Rwanda Security Services area of operations. So when you then compare this to M23, which I believe is a more vibrant force, I think it will be more difficult for the SADC force in the DRC to combat the M23, given that they are also not well resourced. You know, if you look at the SADC force, they will rely more on South Africa, but which is of course more resourced than the other intervening countries. But the reality is that the capacity to effectively pursue any meaningful campaign against the M23 is not exactly there, because South African Defense Forces is overstretched and underfunded. The M23 will be difficult because they are too familiar with the terrain. And also because they are fighting for the local population. They have the general support and sympathy of the population in that region. The population in Eastern DRC are fully aware that the M23 is fighting for their rights and to protect them against from the onslaught from the Congolese army and the FDLR in collaboration with the negative forces operating in that region.
So is the SADC forces more of like a foreign, it's more of like a perceived as a foreign army within the DRC as opposed to M23?
Yes, largely because the M23, they have sympathy in that region because they are fighting for the cause of the Congolese, the wonderful Congolese who are in that region, who you and me know that their rights are undermined. There is a genocide going on there against them, and they are regarded as foreigners. They don't have full rights in the Congo. So they obviously support the M23 because the M23 is fighting to restore their rights.
Okay. So yeah, sorry, I don't want to cut you off. Do you have more to say?
No. It's fine. It's fine for now.
Okay, great. So I wanted to ask, the next question was, so SADC has obviously is pledged to deploy 7,000 troops to the DRC over the next 12 months. So how do you, in your learned experience, how do you see this conflict evolving?
See, this is a complex operation which requires resources, which I don't think SADC will be able to raise. And the SADC mission will obviously require foreign assistance in terms of funding their military intervention. So that deployment is not dependent on the member countries that are involved in the mission, but external stakeholders, unless, of course, if the DRC government provides funding itself. But I don't see SADC having such resources to combat the M23. This is a very complex operation.
Right. Yeah, so along with South Africa, Malawi and Tanzania have also deployed troops to the DRC, and it's alleged by the DRC government that they will fight M23. Do you think that these nations refuse to recognize the plight of the Congolese Tutsis in the DRC? Why do you think that is? And what would be the reasons behind this willful blindness? Because we recently, in the past couple of months, we discussed the MONUSCO's involvement in the DRC and how they are pretty much going against their stated mandate. Why do you think there's such willful blindness within the DRC from all these external actors?
Firstly, I'm tempted to believe that this deployment was based on ignorance on what exactly is happening in the Eastern DRC, because SADC should have understood that, number one, this is an internal dispute between Congolese, which the regional bloc should have helped better by facilitating dialogue between the parties involved. Secondly, I also think there is not enough information within SADC region about the ongoing genocide against the Congolese Tutsi is being executed by the FDR and, of course, facilitated by the DRC government. Thirdly, I think SADC's deployment was aimed at exerting its influence on the DRC ahead of the East African community, which, of course, the DRC is also a member.
Right.
Which, in my opinion, is very unfortunate because it undermines the spirit of unity among the regional blocs in Africa. As alluded earlier, it is clear that the Eastern African bloc was registering some progress in addressing the conflict between the M23 and the Kinshasa government, but because they decided not to be partisan in handling this conflict, they were chased away by the government of the DRC. SADC's willingness to under the circumstances does not augur well with the spirit of the African continental a free trade area, which calls for cooperation and unity among Africans. Sure. I also think that the deployment was motivated by the desire to explore natural resources within the DRC by the member states that have deployed. Okay. I think that could have been a major motivation.
Yeah, certainly. I think so too. Yeah, because that's the one underlying factor that people conveniently seem to omit from these discussions, how rich in resources the DRC is. That's why people are so eager to get involved. So I'm closing us off. So it's been reported that M23 has appointed administrators in the territories under its control. Do you think that we are headed towards secession and a dismemberment of the DRC? What is your take on that?
I'm sure this is being done to assure the vulnerable communities in that region and giving them a sense of security. But the bigger scope of things, in my view, is that I will make reference to what was said by one of Africa's most celebrated revolutionaries, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere. But before I do so, I would like to say that the border between Rwanda and the DRC was demarcated by the colonialists because in the middle of the 19th century, both North and South Kivu were populated by Rwandophones, meaning that it was their land and that the resources in that territory belonged to them. When the boundaries of what is now the DRC were drawn during colonialism, they were incorporated, the incorporated territories that belonged to the Rwandophones into the modern day DRC. Now back to what Nyerere said. It prompted him to famously declare that if authorities in Kinshasa accepted the territories together with the natural resources therein, they must therefore be able to also accept the people that occupied the territories that they had been given. Because the DRC government has refused to recognize the Rwandophones in South and North Kivu as Congolese nationals. But meanwhile, they claim the territories together with resources therein in a violation of natural justice ethos. I will not be surprised if the M23 will now start agitating for secession, because where do they go? They were removed and their land was apportioned to the then Zaire, which is now the DRC. So if Kinshasa accepts the territory and the natural resources, the law of natural justice will allow them to also recognize the people that were occupying those territories that they were given to also become part and parcel of the DRC. So I don't have information about whether they will agitate for secession, but I think under the prevailing circumstances, they may say, if you didn't recognize us, then you should also withdraw your claim for the territory and the natural resources in those areas. That's what I think.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Mr. Kelvin Jakachira.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much, and good night.
Have a good night. Thank you very much for sticking with us till the end. Be sure to check out our website at panafricanreview.com, and we will see you guys in the next episode.